Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Welcome back to another episode of Who Will Be the Biggest Flop? This is part 19 for the weekend ending on December 24th, 2023, Christmas Eve, and several new movies opened this weekend. And I'd like to ask everyone to please like this video, please press the red subscribe button to support this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. Thanks! We'll begin by listing the top 5 movies at this weekend's domestic box office, which is substantially different from last week's top 5 movies. Opening in theaters at number 1 in this weekend's domestic box office was Warner Bros. And DC Studios' Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, otherwise known as Aquaman 2, which starred Jason Momoa and Amber Heard. Domestically, the movie only earned $28.1 million, which was rather bad because it fell short of the predicted box office range of $29 million to $38 million that I had talked about in a video that I had released last week. Internationally, the movie did considerably better, earning $80 million for a global gross opening weekend box office total of $108.2 million. I'll be coming back to talk more about this movie shortly. Coming in at number 2 at this weekend's domestic box office was the movie that had been number 1 last weekend, Warner Bros. Movie Wonka, starring Timothée Chalamet. The movie added $17.7 million to its domestic box office, which brought the total up to $75.2 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $58.9 million to bring its international box office total up to $171.3 million. So globally, the movie earned another $95.1 million to bring its global gross box office total up to $246.6 million. I'll also be coming back to talk more about this movie shortly. Also opening in theaters this weekend, but at number 3, was the animated movie by Illumination Entertainment entitled Migration. And while I remember seeing a large balloon marketing the movie during Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade last month, the movie only managed to earn $12.3 million domestically. Similar to the movie Wonka, Migration also opened in some international markets before opening in the US. So coming into this weekend, the movie had already earned $13.7 million internationally, but added another $8.3 million to bring its current international box office total up to $22 million. So globally, the movie earned another $20.6 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $34.3 million. With a $72 million production budget, which, when multiplied by 2.5 to estimate a mid-range break-even point of $180 million, my initial projections show that the movie won't break even, but its losses will probably be less than $50 million, so it won't be a contestant for Who Will Be the Biggest Flop? Also opening in theaters this weekend, but at number 4, was Columbia Pictures' romantic comedy entitled Anyone But You, which earned $6.2 million, but no international box office has yet been reported. With a production budget of only $25 million, I don't plan to track this movie closely. And finally, another movie that opened this weekend, but in the 5th spot domestically, was the Indian movie Salaar, which is also known as Salaar Part 1 Ceasefire. Domestically, the movie earned around $5.5 million, but there appears to be some additional early domestic box office to bring its current domestic box office total up to $6.3 million. No international box office has yet been reported, but I'm not planning to closely track this movie. So what happened to last week's movies that had been in the top 5 spots? With the exception of Wonka, they all got pushed down below the movies that opened, along with another movie that had opened this weekend, but into 6th place, The Iron Claw. But The Boy and the Heron slipped into 7th place, The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes slipped into 8th place, Godzilla Minus One slipped into 9th place, and Trolls Band Together slipped into 12th place. So now let's talk about Aquaman 2 again. Its very sad domestic opening weekend box office earnings of only $28.1 million was actually slightly higher than the $25 million domestic opening weekend box office that Blue Beetle had earned back in August. So the movie's domestic opening weekend box office did fall between those of Blue Beetle and The Flash, just as I had predicted in my video that I had released last week. But I was surprised that it did not manage to reach $29 million, which was the lower end of the domestic opening weekend box office that Box Office Pro had predicted on December 15th. Having a lower than expected domestic opening weekend box office has, of course, also reduced this movie's potential final domestic box office earnings. So using the franchise average weekly drop of 39.67% and one standard deviation above and below, which is a range from 30.52% to 48.83%, the new predicted final domestic box office for Aquaman 2 is as follows: $57.6 million on the low end, $70.8 million at the mid-range, and $91.9 million at the upper end. And as the chart shows, the final domestic box office for Blue Beetle cuts right through the middle. So it's possible that Aquaman 2 won't even earn as much as Blue Beetle did domestically. But the movie's current domestic share is very low at 25.97%. So the movie's final global gross box office projections have gone up to a range from $221.6 million at the low end, $272.7 million at the mid-range, and $354.1 million at the upper end. So Aquaman 2 will definitely earn a lot more globally than Blue Beetle did, and it could very well surpass the global earnings of The Flash, which, as this chart illustrates, cuts right through the middle of the projected range. With an estimated break-even point of $512.5 million, which is based on multiplying the movie's $205 million production budget by 2.5 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget, the movie currently stands to lose somewhere between $158.4 million to $290.9 million in global gross box office revenue. And when we divide that range by 2, we get a range of losses of $79.2 million to $145.4 million for Warner Brothers and DC Studios. Wonka, on the other hand, has had a bit of a turnaround following its lackluster opening weekend. Using an estimated range of average weekly drops ranging from 30 to 40%, I can project that Wonka may earn a final domestic box office ranging from $129.5 million at the low end, $142.4 million at the mid-range, and $159.4 million at the upper end. So given its current domestic share of 30.51%, which is nearly 5% higher than what it was last week, as I said would likely happen in last week's video that was part 18 of my Who Will Be the Biggest Flop video series, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office revenue may range from $424.5 million at the low end, $466.7 million at the mid-range, and $522.5 million at the upper end. And that entire range is greater than the movie's estimated break-even point of $312.5 million, which is obtained by multiplying the movie's $125 million production budget by 2.5. So the movie may break even as early as next weekend because its current earnings are at nearly 79% of its estimated break-even point. Now we'll get to our current contestants, which were all pushed very far down the list in terms of this weekend's domestic box office. So let's have a very warm welcome for our contestant from Disney that came in 13th place in this weekend's domestic box office, the animated movie Wish. Domestically, the movie earned another $1.1 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $57.5 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $14.9 million to bring its current international box office total up to $86.8 million. Globally, the movie earned another $18.1 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $144.3 million. So using a possible range of average weekly drops ranging from 30 to 40%, we get the following range of possible final domestic box office values ranging from a low of $62.3 million at the low end, $63.4 million at the mid-range, and $64.9 million at the upper end. And using the movie's current domestic share of 39.84%, which is lower than last week's, the movie's possible final global gross box office revenue may range from $156.4 million at the low end, $159.2 million at the mid-range, and $162.9 million at the upper end, which is also higher than last week's projection, but still far below the movie's estimated break-even point of $500 million, which is obtained by multiplying the movie's $200 million production budget by 2.5. So this movie may lose somewhere on the order of $337.1 million to $343.6 million in global gross box office revenue, which when we divide by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, leaves a range of possible losses for Disney ranging from $168.5 million to $171.8 million. And we'll see shortly where that places the movie in terms of ranking for who will be the biggest flop. Now let's have a warm welcome for our next entry from Columbia Pictures and Apple Film, Napoleon starring Joaquin Phoenix, which was 14th in this weekend's domestic box office. Domestically, the movie earned another $775,000 to bring its current domestic box office total up to $59.2 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $7.8 million to bring its international box office total up to $139.2 million. So globally, the movie earned another $10 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $198.4 million. Using a range of possible average weekly drops of 30 to 40%, I can project that the movie's final domestic box office revenue may range from $62.5 million at the low end, $63.2 million at the mid-range, and $64.2 million at the upper end. And with a current domestic share of 29.84%, we get a range of possible final global gross box office values ranging from $209.4 million at the low end, $211.9 million at the mid-range, and $215.3 million at the upper end, which is still nowhere near the estimated break-even point of $500 million, which is obtained by multiplying the movie's $200 million production budget by 2.5. So Napoleon may lose somewhere on the order of $284.7 million to $290.6 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when we divide by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that we get a potential range of losses for Columbia Pictures and Apple Film of $142.4 million to $145.3 million, which is still incredibly close to the range of losses estimated for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, but not in a statistical tie. And now, please give a warm welcome to our final entry, which came from Disney and Marvel Studios that slipped way down into 19th place overall in this weekend's domestic box office. The very woke 33rd MCU movie entitled The Marvels, starring Brie Larson and Samuel L. Jackson. Domestically, the movie earned another $75,000 to bring its current domestic box office total up to $84.4 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $1.3 million to bring its current international box office total up to $120.6 million. Globally, the movie earned another $1.8 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $205.1 million. That places the current domestic share for The Marvels at 41.17%. For projections, since the movie's average weekly drop has stabilized, I will be using its value of 54.61% and one standard deviation above and below for a range from 48.87% to 60.35%. Thus, using that range of average weekly drops, I can project that the movie's final domestic box office may fall somewhere within the range from $84.7 million at the low end, $84.8 million at the mid-range, and $84.9 million at the upper end of the range. And as I have said for the past 3 weeks, The Marvels is going to be the first ever MCU movie to not earn at least $100 million at the domestic box office, which effectively means that it's going to become the MCU's lowest grossing film domestically of all time. Not only that, using the movie's current domestic share of 41.17%, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office will only be somewhere within the range from $205.8 million at the low end, $205.9 million at the mid-range, and $206.2 million at the upper end. So the movie will most definitely become the MCU's lowest grossing movie worldwide of all time as well. Given that the movie has a production budget of $274.8 million, we can calculate an estimated break-even point range by multiplying that by 2.5 and 3.0, which yields values ranging from $687 million to $824.4 million. And when we subtract the movie's range of possible final global gross box office values from the estimated break-even point range, we get a range of possible losses from $480.8 million to $618.6 million in global gross box office revenue. When we divide that range by 2, we get a possible range of losses for Disney and Marvel Studios ranging from $240.4 million to $309.3 million, which brings the movie incredibly close to the range of losses that The Flash has. A movie that had previously been overlooked in terms of loss is Killers of the Flower Moon, which came in 23rd place in this weekend's domestic box office and is in its 10th week in theaters, so I won't be doing any projections on its current box office. The movie has a production budget of $200 million, which when we multiply by 2.5 means that it has an estimated break-even point of $500 million. And the movie's current global gross box office total is at $156.2 million. So the movie has lost around $343.8 million in global gross box office revenue, which when we divide by 2 means that the production companies involved have lost around $171.9 million, which places it into a statistical tie with Disney's movie Wish. So we'll now combine the results from our newest contestants with our other 4 contestant movies that are no longer playing in theaters. The Flash, Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction, Haunted Mansion, and Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. The production budgets for each of these 4 movies, as shown in this chart, range from a low of $157.8 million to a high of $300 million. And after estimating a break-even point range for each movie by multiplying each movie's production budget by 2.5 and 3.0, we can visualize the estimated break-even point ranges along with the final global gross box office revenue earned by each movie in this next chart, which clearly shows just how much lower each of the movies' earnings were as compared to their respective break-even point ranges. And when we subtract each of the movie's final global gross box office revenues from their respective break-even point ranges, we'll get a range of losses in terms of global gross box office revenue that will then divide by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves. The resulting quotients are the estimated range of losses suffered by each studio that's responsible for producing each of these 4 movies that all flopped in theaters, which I have combined with the losses for the current contestants playing in theaters. The Flash, whose losses range from $239.7 million to $314.7 million, remains in first place, with The Marvels remaining in second place. Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction, whose losses range from $176.4 million to $250.1 million, remains in third place. Haunted Mansion, whose losses range from $138.6 million to $178 million, moved up to fourth place, while Killers of the Flower Moon and Wish follow it in fifth place in a statistical tie. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, whose losses range from $78.8 million to $151.3 million, remains in sixth place, while Aquaman 2 and Napoleon take seventh place in a statistical tie. So be sure to tune in next week for another exciting episode of Who Will Be the Biggest Flop? Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.